Hi, Steve Hayes here, and welcome to Days Are Getting Better, episode 39. Today, I want to talk a little bit about processes of change in a blog I've written that's kind of upside down in a way that might interest you. I want to talk just a little bit about the industrialization of mental and behavioral health and social wellness, and how that links to what's happening in the world with artificial intelligence and some things that are just over the horizon that may really require modern minds for this modern world that we've created. I want to talk a bit about behavior analysis, the field from which I come, at least by orientation, and a little bit about its strengths and weaknesses, but how they might apply to this present moment, and say a couple of things about um, some exciting events that are happening. So let's get right to it. In the associated blog that comes with this, I wrote about 5 bad ideas in processes of change. You've heard me talk a lot about psychological flexibility and its expansion within the various domains: emotion, cognition, attention, sense of self, and so on, but also across levels of analysis: social, cultural, relational, and biophysiological, and also across schools of thought, you might say, in such a way that some of the work that we've done for all these years to try to build a process-based approach that we call acceptance and commitment therapy or training, ACT in either case, can seamlessly move into the generation of process-based approaches more generally and maybe help create a playing field, an agora, a marketplace of ideas in which we can be a little more open about the things that we try and a little more focused on the kinds of evidence we need to know whether or not we're making progress. So I'll just let you check out the blog on the 5 bad ideas. If you look a little bit, you'll see that they're everywhere when people are talking about, um, even about the very topics that you would think people would want to apply a more personalized approach to. Processes, we've argued, have to be personal. They can't be seen by arbitrary collectives. But yet, when we're looking at personalization, and there's a wonderful project coming from a student in Australian Catholic University, who the Institute for Better Health, the charitable organization that I'm president of, has helped fund. I won't steal her thunder, but Farah will be talking pretty soon publicly about research that she's doing on how people have been personalizing personalized-based therapy. And let me just say it's a bit of a shock because it hardly looks like what you would expect from a real process of personalization. So it's still early on, that message of the need when you're talking about processes of change to talk about particular people or couples or families. And so the blog will help set up some sensitivity, maybe. And I mean it, not just for therapists, but also for consumers at large. Most of the people who listen to me actually on Days Are Getting Better are probably not therapists. We haven't really asked those questions in detail. We're going to try to do a little more of that so we can learn how to serve you a little better. But most apparently are not, and that makes perfect sense because anybody's welcome to get my newsletter and get these podcasts. But informed consumers should know how to sniff out when the era of personalization arrives, which it is definitely here, sniff out what's real from what's not. Um, I want to talk, though, as sort of the main topic here, not what's in the blog, but a little bit about some older ideas about industrialization and some things that I see coming. The word industrialization sounds a little creepy and like, ugh, how do I be part of an industry? I'm a therapist, or I'm trying to help people, and so on. But if you just think about how you would do your daily duties, and how would you be able to function without industrialization? There's almost nothing that you do in your day-to-day life other than nature walks. And even those, who's going to make the shoes, who's going to create the lights and make it safe to walk at night, and so on. The flashlight that you use to go down the path. Uh, Without industries, at one time, the whole idea of industrialization at all, even at cottage industries of particular people doing something over and over again, was a really radical new idea because they become more efficient, they become skilled at it. You could go to the cobbler, you could go to the person who's really an expert blacksmith or something. That's cottage industry. But that passed away in many, many areas as various kinds of goods and services became more industrialized. And what do we mean by that? I think what we mean is organized systems in which vendors or suppliers of goods or services are held accountable to a particular bottom line quality or value per unit spent, and compete with others to try to produce those goods and services to grab your attention and to receive the support from you for providing them. And in the history of the world, when particular areas open up because of technological innovations or things like that, when the steam engine comes along and now there's a whole different way to move around, or when the printing press emerges and there's new ways to get information, or, of course, the things that we're seeing in the modern day with um, things in my lifetime. I'm old enough to have actually seen color TVs arrive, so I'm that old. But no, I was alive when radio was being shown. Cynics, don't be teasing this old man. I'm not that old. But I did see the transistor radio, and I did see the first computers, and I did see the typewriters pass away, and the tape drives be replaced by disk drives, and the hard disks by the solid state, and on it goes. When that happens, when particular segments open up as a combination of what's possible to deliver something, almost always people rush in, and there's a variety of different ways to try to get this done. And there's a cacophony of voices. Vendors proliferate, and people are confused at first. What should I really believe? Because there are always poor quality products or services that are piling in and asking for support. And some of them can succeed for quite a long time, even though they're poor quality, if they're backed up by the right name, or they have tariffs that wall them off, or things like that. But eventually, the poorest ones tend to die out, and the better ones win out to a degree, but within a value segment. So you know that you can buy expensive shoes that are really well made, and poor quality shoes that will do well enough, but don't cost very much. As long as they can kind of meet the target, they can compete within that value segment. Now, when things change quickly, that cycle begins again, and we're in it right now. And it's only to the interests of those who are trying to sell things that are not uh, worth it to spread fear and uncertainty and doubt, FUD, because it allows them to keep that phase when people can't determine what's of value and what isn't. Keep them alive. I think we're seeing that in spades right now with how fast things are changing in areas of information, advice, life guidance, health, diet, sleep, exercise, how to have friends, how to be happy, how to make money, where you should put your money, what kind of jobs you should seek, what kind of education you have, and on it goes. And there was a shudder that has gone through the world with how fast that's changing, because each time something like that happens, when the printing press shows up, or when radio shows up, or consumer electronics shows up, or computers show up, or the internet shows up, or we're just starting with AI. We don't really know where this thing's going to go. And what is our place in all of that? Now, I gave a not just a talk, I wrote a book on some of this stuff years ago, Scientist Practitioner, version 2, the one where I was the lead author on it. And I really wanted to talk about this issue of industrialization because I saw managed care was going to open up mental and behavioral health care to it. And it did, although it quickly was a rush to the bottom where it became managed costs instead of managed care. But I want to share with you something that's in that book that I think was kind of prescient. Um, so let's just see if I can get the right one. You should be looking right now at a little blue slide that has a lot of circles and things on it. This is actually in the book, The Scientist Practitioner. And I'm not going to look at every point here, but I'm going to emphasize something that I think is important in the context of AI. This basically is looking at applied practice, the kinds of things that we do clinically, but also in counseling or at schools or, all the various industrial, organizational, and so forth. That in the context of a particular set of practices, resources, needs, values, things of that kind, in the context of a community and what they will support, there's these circles of how do we even prevent our problems. That could be mental health problems, or it could be problems in fairness or justice or whatever. It could be problems in learning, teaching, things of that kind. And then there's a smaller circle of becoming aware of those processes, and then some sort of contact with a system that's designed to help assess and alleviate them. And there's some sort of triage process. So you make a contact through your pastor or through your primary care provider or through your best friend, and they're going to send you some. They're going to suggest, why don't you go here? Why don't you go there? And that initial contact could be your primary care physician, could be your minister, rabbi, a priest, or a mom, whomever it is, has to kind of then send you on. And there's different levels of help. That could be here's a book to read, a tape to, here's a website to go to. And then there could be empirically supported ideas that people who are less well trained but are cheaper and more easily available provide, or empirically supported methods by higher trained professionals. As you get to a certain point, these folks become knowledge development workers as well, and it kicks up into a knowledge development cycle where functional analysis and therapeutic innovations that providers give to people using their creativity becomes evaluated within the person, one person at a time, informed by basic science, applied science theory, and their clinical experience, informed by it, but accountable to the particular person that we serve, but evaluated. And then there's a kind of a program evaluation phase where you try that over and over and over again. And eventually you get into efficacy testing and some sort of program evaluation that leads to, through clinical replication, by doing it over and over again. It could be a randomized trial, it could be your time series design, it could be done right inside your clinic. You begin to lock down what is needed, and then you have training and dissemination research. Can we replicate the good that's done? How can we develop the measures, teach people, etc.? How can we spread it, let people know about it? And it kicks down to an evaluation process that is going on at this level, but then is also fed by this level of practice guidelines, of consensus documents, of apps and websites and tools that can be put into systems of care that can inform this whole process of prevention, contact, triage, referral, and providing of services that are then kicked up into this knowledge development cycle. I think it's not a bad model. And part of what's cool about it, if you look at what we're doing in process-based therapy and idionomic assessment, we're really trying to understand what works for whom. Really, it's a refinement of this kind of vision. You notice the word randomized trials are not even in that document. Not that randomized trials aren't important. I think they're great. But adding high density longitudinal information so that we can really begin to look at the individual and not just some sort of arbitrary collective where the only role of the individual is to add to the standard deviation, to the error term for the measures that we're taking. Now, what I wanted to say here is I think we have an opportunity here to get ahead of the industrialization of mental and behavioral health care and of social wellness, if we get on top of what's happening using AI tools and assessment for high density longitudinal assessment. And you've heard me talk about this several times before in the area of genomics. I'm not going to repeat it. With this talk, what I just wanted to add is this one thing about why this is so important. I'm shocked by the fact that people do not seem to appreciate that we are allowing industrialization to be consolidated in gigantic economic systems that are controlling the access to the information that allow these AR tools even to function. Constantly you see that, and even to give a request to Google, you're actually allowing them to track, to abstract, to take in, to sell the information about you. This is one example. But furthermore, even more shocking is that there doesn't seem to be much appreciation for the idea that industrialization is going to take us into an era where work itself is a product or a service or whatever that may be done by machines, not in a specific way, which we've got comfortable with. At every step, we worry about it. The Luddites were really worried about the textile machinery. The priests were really worried about printed books and tried to resist that, as opposed to the scribes controlled only by the clerics. The cobblers were really worried by the shoe machines. And we understand all that. At each level, the net effect has been positive for humanity, but we're now at a point in which we can see within the next 10 years, maybe, that most forms of work will be expendable and machines can do it. By the time you have not just AI robots, but physical robots, which is only a few years away in many, many areas of work, and with every day that passes, once it begins, more and more areas of work. What are we going to do when work itself is optional? You can see that world coming. And it's not just a Star Trek episode. And we're going to need modern minds for that world. And so I don't trust the processes of industrialization to give us the mental tools that we need to benefit from processes of industrialization. You can't just allow it to be purely a matter of politics. There's going to have to be, of course, politics and regulation. There is, because some of these things are going to be very dangerous. I mean, iRobot is, you know, Asimov, I was a science fiction fan, is that's the real deal. These are things that we really need to think about, not in a terrified way, but in a thoughtful way. What it's going to do to our economic system, what it's going to do to people who are manual laborers, but then increasingly, I'm going to give you just an example. The work on idionomics is only about 2 or 3 years old. And I went into ChatGPT the other day and I was trying to follow down some of the data on why the early statisticians focused so much on between subject variability instead of within subject variability in trying to determine what is the best measure and the best a method for changing behavior. And it wasn't they didn't know that these were two different sources of variability. They knew it full on well. They hadn't thought it through fully. There's not much evidence that the early folks, Galton and the rest, would suspect that they did, but there's not much evidence that they knew about ergodicity. For example, that they really knew you couldn't go from bell curves of a collective to predict the temporal trajectories of any one person. But I was going through this and looking at things like p-factor analysis, where the early factor analytic folks fought over whether or not you should partition the variance within the person over time first, and then look at similarity, or should you do it across a whole bunch of people at a given point in time? And traditional factor analysis won out. The stats were easier, and plus the culture was headed that way for all kinds of reasons, some of them probably unattractive, the hangover, eugenics, things like that. But So I asked ChatGPT, look at the data on p-factor analysis and the arguments that were made there. Now look at the data on idionomics. I did this just as a trial balloon. And you know who I am, right? And they say, yes, of course, I know who you are. You're Stephen Hayes, and you've been involved in that. Great. Okay. So that includes looking at the things that I've written, but other people as well. And now give me an idea of how I might be able to actually walk through some important things that people need to focus on if they want to understand processes of change in a way that isn't contaminated in the ways that our traditional methods are by ignoring ergodicity, and break this down into an argument that I can write an article about that in a 4-point or 5-point or 10-point way uh, uh, points out why economic analysis is going to be so important. Now, I did this just as a trial balloon. I didn't even know if I knew anything about economics, but the bottom line of the story is I just gasped when the output came along because it was better than anything I could have done. It was better than anything I could have done. You know, excuse me, the self-praise, but by some measures, I'm a world-class psychologist, top 5 clinical psychologist. This is an area I just thought up with my colleagues over the last 3 or 4 years. And a large language learning model, which is dumb. This is not really general, intelligence yet. It's just not. Some of the derived relational responding you'd expect of a child that can't do well yet could do a pretty good job. So here's my point to you. We better have flexible minds to deal with the changes that are coming. We cannot allow ourselves to become in the position of the Luddites who are trying to stop the textile machines, because I kind of like shirts with good cloth that lasts a really long time. These are really good shirts. They're not that expensive, cost $60 each. They'll last for 5, 6, 7 years. I can't afford to have a hand loom text, a shirt made for me in really fine. Uh, I can't afford it. I've looked at it. Well, maybe I could, but it was like, ouch. Ooh, wow. Ooh, how many hundreds of dollars for that shirt? Oh, man. So don't be telling me that industrialization is awful. Yeah, the oligarchy controlling everything is an awful vision. And yeah, we've got some really big political challenges, but I'm a psychologist and well, I'm interested in that. Excuse me for living. I just don't think I necessarily know all of those answers about how to do that. I mean, I want to work on things like pro-social and stuff like that that will help create the kind of groups input to things like that. But I also want to work with people like you who are listening to the ideas that I have and to decide how are we going to stay ahead of AI and the industrialization of knowledge and work without being crushed by it. Never in the history of the world have you been able to stop a process of industrialization once it begins. You might say, oh, we'll regulate it, we'll pass laws. Yes, we should do that. But don't you understand that makes industrialization easier? I mean, at the point at which you say, for example, hey, your health product has to allow something more than drive-by delivery. You have to offer women the opportunity to go into a maternity ward and to have time to make sure that the baby is safe and the birth was well done. And so when that happened, those lawsuits happened, it leveled the playing field so that the different plans could compete better. In other words, it made industrialization more possible and more likely to be successful for consumers, yes, but especially for the folks who own the businesses. The history of regulation and all of that is not, yeah, you can overregulate, you can. But in general, the history is not that it crushes the creative spirit and blah, 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 blah. Oh, please. That some of that is way too extreme. Some of the rhetoric around that. In the same way, If you just say, Katie, bar the door, we're not going to allow robots. We're not going to allow AI. Explain to me how you're going to do that and whether or not it's really good for humanity. Conversely, if you say, yes, we will allow that, but we really want to make sure that there are safety guardrails in place. We don't want, if you own 500,000 robots, you can just have your own private army. Excuse me. We don't want that, regardless of what your name is. That's not hostile to industrialization. We don't want the ability for AI to put artificial information into the world. We want to make sure that what's out there is accurate and vetted as best we can, not necessarily by top-down command and control. That isn't often hasn't worked. The commissar can't be trusted, but nor through bottom-up greed is good private ownership. And if you look at the kinds of things that pro-social is talking about, how you set up group control at multiple levels so that we can create trust and safety using evolutionary principles that have served us ever since our species began, and that created some of these various things we're talking about, such as human language, as an extension of cooperation, I believe. Let's build that in. Let's find a way to build that in. So now a field that has been pretty darn good at that, surprisingly, is, and I know I'm going darn long on this, but is behavior analysis. I mean, I know behavior analysis is just a small little wing and it's focused so much on developmental disabilities and so forth, and it's become a shadow of its former self in terms of its grand aspirations. But I'm an old behavior analyst, and I have to say, I was super proud to be there in a description of multi-level selection and how it works using bibliometric analysis of the book Pro-Social with David Sloan Wilson, myself. Paul Atkins couldn't be there because it's 3 in the morning in Australia where he was, with a really wonderful presentation of how the citations of that groundbreaking book on bringing Lynn Ostrom's core design principles, psychological flexibility together into a single approach and teaching people on that. I'm pleased to see that finally now the outcome data are coming, especially masters and dissertations. People are waking up, doing that work, which is wonderful. And one of the things that it showed in the bibliometric analysis is that it's going into many, many different fields, just as you would hope, in economics, biology, theology, and so forth. But the single most common field after multidisciplinary, with a pretty big spike, was behavior analysis. And no, I actually said out loud, and then I was immediately embarrassed. Maybe it's because I'm distorting the numbers because I'm citing it all the time, and I come from a behavior analysis program after I left clinical psychology for reasons we don't have to go into politics in my department and into behavior analysis. I'm retired now, but no, because it was multiple behavior analysts. I mean, I had some impact, but around the world. And I knew that because now I'm listening to them discuss why they are using the book. And so, behavior analysis was always about high precision, high scope principles being able to be put into analyses, functional analyses of the needs of particular persons or couples or families or organizations. But particularity was what was important. It wasn't that it is only defined by the skin. No, it's defined by whatever unit is that you're looking at. You can look at a couple as a unit, or a family as a unit, or organization as a unit. And behavior analysis has always done that. Organizational behavior management, things of that kind. And so I will see if I can find the link before this goes out. And I sent a little thing to David Sloan Wilson. Can we get that video up? Because it was fascinating, and I think you'd love to see it, of how in the 6 years since that book was printed, it has spread around the world in all kinds of different areas. But one predictable thing are the students of the students, lineages, another one, geographical areas, another one, what field you're in. And I'm proud to say behavior analysis saw the value of, I mean, after all, some of them still are arguing about psychological flexibility, to embrace Lynn Ostrom's design principles and psychological flexibility and start doing, I'm pretty proud of the field. And in that context, I want to mention that ACT Bootcamp for Behavior Analysis is back. The last one was in 2022. My wife and I created boot camp. We've taken it back and we've decided to put it into the Institute for Better Health, which I'm president of. I don't take money from IBH. I give money to IBH. It's a charitable organization. I do all of my work for free there. And Spencer Smith is the chief executive officer. One cool thing about putting it there is it means that money can then be inside this charitable organization from which we can do the wonderful work of IBH. And the single most important thing we're doing is Mindgrapher. We are developing the idionomic analytic tools that we think we can use to kill the DSM. We already have 500,000 data points inside Mindgrapher, fully protected, HIPAA compliant, GDPR, all those kinds of things, and growing every month. So by putting it there, you're really doing something good for the world when you agree to come. So if you're a behavior analyst and you've never done boot camp before, for goodness sakes, please look at below or in my newsletter and find the link for ACT Boot Camp for Behavior Analysts, which will be in Oakland at the Sydney Center Marriott, great hotel, in April 24, 5, 6, 7. And so it's about, 10, 11 weeks away, not very far away, but if you're within easy flying or driving distance, boot camp will just rock your world as a behavior analyst. And we have really great trainers there. DJ Moran, myself, DJ early BCBA, really good in organizational, things like that. Siri Ming, a real expert in RFT and how that makes sense of ACT processes. Brianna Cower, really skilled BCBA and a recognized trainer, all of them are recognized trainers in ACBS, who knows how to make things simpler and to really be very practical in our work in parent training and things of that kind. And of course, me, the old blog guy, would be there. So let's call it a wrap. I've gone a little long. Hope not too long to chase you all away. But my brief summary is big changes are coming. We're going to need modern minds for this modern world. And we, as a behavioral science community, and those who are interested in following our work, so everybody who's listening to me now, there's a reason why you're following it, really need to be thinking about not just, how we deal with immediate political things that may concern us or the economic challenges we may face, but how we will avoid being Luddites on the one hand, or being roadkill for oligarchs and allow top-down command and control to steal our ability to really have something wonderful happen with the industrialization of knowledge development that is, and work in a more general way that is coming. Peace, love, and life, my friends.